Horrific murders. Investigation process. Portrait of the perpetrator. Motive for the crime. Final verdict. Welcome to Mysterious Case. Hello. Before diving into today's story, I just want to say that this video is intended for education, awareness, and entertainment. Please remember to always treat others kindly in your daily life. Now, if you haven't followed Mysterious Case yet, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming cases. Thank you, and let's get started. On December 2nd, 2018, Auckland, New Zealand was aglow with Christmas lights, but within the Millane family, a vague sense of unease was growing. That day was Grace Millane's 22nd birthday, a vibrant young woman who had left her hometown to pursue her dream of exploring the world. Birthday messages from family and friends poured in, but there was no response. What had happened to this sociable, art-loving girl who was so close to her family? Grace Millane was born on December 2nd, 1996, into a warm middle-class family in Essex, England. The youngest of three siblings, alongside her older brothers Michael and Declan, Grace grew up enveloped in the love of her parents, David Millane and Gillian, also known as Jillian. From a young age, she displayed a lively, friendly personality and an artistic soul. Without formal training, Grace possessed a natural talent for painting. Her artworks, though simple, always carried a strange vitality, as if she poured her entire heart into every stroke. After graduating from the University of Lincoln with a bachelor's degree in advertising and marketing in 2018, Grace decided to take a year to travel before entering the workforce. For her, it wasn't just a journey of discovery. It was a way to embrace her youth, meet new people, and capture unforgettable moments. Before setting off, she cut off her long hair and donated it to the Little Princess Trust, a charity that turns hair into wigs for children with cancer. This act was a testament to her compassionate heart, a person who cared for those less fortunate. Grace's adventure began in Peru, where she spent 6 weeks wandering through the colorful landscapes of South America. The photos she sent home showed her beaming smile alongside new friends, breathtaking scenery, and an unmistakable joy. From South America, Grace arrived in New Zealand on November 19, 2018, carrying the excitement of a 21-year-old backpacker. She chose Auckland as her stop, staying at Base Backpackers on Queen Street, a modest hostel where she shared a room with fellow travelers from around the world. On the evening of December 1st, 2018, just hours before her birthday, Grace stood in front of the dazzling Christmas tree at Sky City, a bustling entertainment complex in the central Auckland. She snapped a photo of the brightly lit tree and sent it to her family, the last message they would receive from her. That night, Grace had a date. Through Tinder, she had connected with a 26-year-old man named Jesse Kempson. After exchanging a few messages, they decided to meet up for a fun evening together. Security camera footage captured Grace leaving the hostel at 5:37 p.m. She wore a black knee-length dress, white shoes, and carried a small handbag, an elegant yet youthful look. Upon arriving at Sky City, Grace waited for a moment before Jesse appeared. They shared an awkward hug and shy smiles, the typical start of a first date. The pair began their evening at a burger joint in Sky City. They chatted, laughed, and seemed to quickly find comfort in each other's company. After the meal, they moved to a Mexican bar for a few more drinks. Jesse courteously paid, while Grace maintained her radiant demeanor. By around 8:25 p.m., they continued to the Bluestone Room bar, just a few minutes' walk from the CityLife Hotel, where Jesse was staying. The atmosphere grew more intimate there. Cameras captured them sitting close, sharing light kisses and affectionate gestures. Grace appeared to be enjoying the moment. While Jesse briefly stepped away from the table, she texted her best friend Amina in England. "I really click with him. He's a manager at an oil company, lives in a hotel. I'll tell you more tomorrow." At 9:40 p.m., footage showed them leaving the bar hand in hand, heading toward the CityLife Hotel. Jesse had his arm around Grace's shoulders. Both looked happy and at ease. They entered the elevator together, heading up to Jesse's floor. As the elevator doors closed at 9:40 p.m. on December 1st, 2018, no one knew that Grace Millane had just stepped into the final chapter of her life. Outside, Auckland buzzed with lights and laughter, but inside a room at the CityLife Hotel, a horrific secret was being concealed. The next morning, December 2nd, Grace's 22nd birthday, family and friends in England began sending celebratory messages. "Happy birthday, Grace! Hope you have a great day," her brother Declan wrote, but there was no reply. Grace's phone, once constantly lit up with calls and photos from around the world, now only returned long, cold dial tones. Grace was someone who always stayed in touch. Whether in Peru or New Zealand, she called home almost daily, sending pictures and stories about new friends. Her family knew she carried two phones, one primary, one backup, to ensure she was never out of reach. Yet today, both numbers were unreachable. "Maybe she's busy partying," her mother, Jillian, tried to reassure herself. But as hours passed with no sign of Grace, an uneasy feeling began to creep into their hearts. Meanwhile, at the CityLife Hotel, Jesse Kempson acted as if nothing was amiss. On the morning of December 2nd, security cameras captured him entering the elevator alone, his demeanor eerily calm. Grace was nowhere to be seen. He left the hotel, crossed the street to a nearby shopping center, and purchased a large suitcase, the kind big enough for an extended trip. He brought it back to his room, then left again, this time to another store to buy cleaning supplies, bleach, brushes, and wiping materials. Taken individually, these actions might seem like preparations for an ordinary day. But alongside Grace's disappearance, they became the first pieces of a dark puzzle. That afternoon, Kempson wasn't done. He called a taxi to a car rental company, selected a red Toyota Corolla, paid quickly, and drove back to the hotel. But instead of resting, he did something bizarre. He went on another date. Just hours after leaving the room where Grace had vanished, Kempson met another woman he'd connected with on Tinder. They sat in a bar, and the conversation soon turned strange. Kempson began talking about burying bodies, remote areas in the Waitakere Ranges, and even spun an odd tale about a friend who accidentally killed someone during sex. The woman, chilled to the bone, declined his offer to get in his car and took a taxi home. Later, she described him as a creep, an instinct that may have saved her life. That evening, Kempson returned to the hotel. He borrowed a Rug Doctor carpet cleaner from the front desk, explaining that he'd spilled red wine on the floor. At 9:30 p.m., cameras caught him pushing a hotel luggage cart into the elevator. On it was the large suitcase he'd bought that morning, now unusually heavy, along with a few smaller bags. Kempson loaded everything into the Corolla and drove off into the darkness. On the morning of December 3rd, Kempson continued his suspicious behavior. At 7 a.m., he went to a convenience store and bought a shovel. 2 hours later, he appeared at a public car wash, meticulously cleaning the Corolla inside and out. When he returned it to the rental company, it was spotless, no trace of anything suspicious. Over the next few days, cameras caught him several times, discarding mysterious bags into trash bins scattered around the city. Each action was carried out with a chilling calmness. By December 5th, with Grace silent for 3 days, her family could no longer wait. From distant England, her father, David Millane, and her brother flew to Auckland, clinging to the faint hope that she had simply gotten lost somewhere. They contacted the police and an official investigation began. At a press conference that day, David stood before the microphone, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm David Millane, Grace's dad. She's been missing for several days now. The last time we spoke to her was Saturday night, December 1st. Our family is extremely worried for her safety. If anyone knows anything, please help us." Auckland police sprang into action. Their starting point was base backpackers, where Grace had been staying. All her belongings, clothes, backpack, documents, remained untouched in her room, as if she'd only stepped out for a moment. This deepened their suspicions. If Grace had left willingly, why didn't she take anything with her? Thanks to the city's extensive network of security cameras, police quickly traced her movements that night. Footage from Sky City, the Mexican bar, Bluestone Room, and finally the CityLife Hotel came into sharp focus. They realized she wasn't alone. Beside her was a man, Jesse Kempson. Police tracked down Kempson, the last person seen with Grace. In his first interview on December 5th, he appeared cooperative, recounting the date with calm composure. "We met at Sky City through Tinder. We had a few drinks, ate dinner, then parted ways around 10 p.m. I hugged her goodbye and said we'd meet again tomorrow. But the next morning I texted her and saw she'd blocked me, Kempson said without hesitation. When asked about providing a DNA sample, he nodded readily. Of course, I haven't done anything wrong. But as police pressed further, he grew flustered. Am I being arrested for something I didn't do? Kempson's story sounded plausible, but the police weren't easily convinced. They had nearly 6 terabytes of security camera data at their disposal, unblinking eyes that never lied. The footage showed Grace entering the CityLife Hotel with Kempson. Yet the next morning, Kempson emerged alone, followed by a series of strange actions: buying a suitcase, a shovel, renting a car, and discarding items in trash bins. A question loomed large in the investigators' minds. If nothing was amiss, why was Kempson behaving like someone with something to hide? As Auckland police began analyzing terabytes of security camera footage, they had no idea they were unraveling one of New Zealand's most shocking cases. The images from the CityLife Hotel painted a story starkly different from Jesse Kempson's initial account. He claimed Grace left after a goodbye hug at 10 p.m., but the cameras told another tale. Grace entered the elevator with Kempson, went up to his floor, and there was no trace of her leaving afterward. Meanwhile, Kempson emerged alone the next morning, his demeanor cold and unshaken, as if the previous night had been a fleeting dream. Investigators didn't stop there. They rewound every frame, tracking Kempson's every move in the days that followed. From buying the large suitcase and cleaning supplies to renting the red Toyota Corolla, his actions were captured in vivid detail. But what chilled them was the sight of Kempson pushing the heavily laden suitcase onto a hotel cart on the night of December 2nd. It didn't look like a suitcase packed for a trip. Bulky, cumbersome, and the careful way Kempson loaded it into the Corolla sent shivers down their spines. We knew he was hiding something, an investigator later revealed. The question was, where's Grace? Police decided to search Kempson's room at the CityLife Hotel. Though he'd used a carpet cleaner and bleach to scrub it down, forensic experts uncovered traces of blood hidden beneath the carpet using luminol, a chemical that glows when it contacts hemoglobin. Small bloodstains scattered around the carpet's edge, and near the bed told a story Kempson couldn't erase. Violence had taken place in that room, but Grace's body was no longer there. The suitcase, the shovel, and the mysterious late-night drive all pointed to a horrifying possibility. Kempson had killed Grace and was disposing of her body. To find answers, police dug into Kempson's phone data. What they uncovered left even seasoned investigators shaken. Around 1:30 a.m. on December 2nd, just hours after Grace entered his room, Kempson had searched Google for terms like flesh-eating birds in New Zealand and remote areas in Waitakere. He didn't stop there. After these chilling searches, Kempson visited a pornographic website, watching videos while Grace's body, if suspicions were correct, lay somewhere in the room. More horrifying still, they found 7 photos on his phone, images of Grace's lower body posed in various positions. She was no longer alive in those pictures, her face rigid, eyes closed, and bruises clearly visible on her neck and chest. Kempson hadn't just killed her. He'd turned her death into something to satisfy his twisted desires. GPS data from his phone and the rental car led police to the Waitakere Ranges, a remote hilly area west of Auckland. On December 8th, after securing an arrest warrant for Kempson, they brought him back to the station for a second interrogation. This time, faced with irrefutable evidence, Kempson abandoned his earlier confidence. His voice trembled, eyes darting, as he offered a new story. She told me about 50 shades. We started having sex, just normal at first. But then she wanted it rougher. We were on the floor and she told me to choke her. Afterward, I took a shower and I fell asleep in the bathroom. When I woke up, she was lying dead on the floor, blood everywhere. I panicked, didn't know what to do. Kempson's testimony sounded like a cheap script. He insisted it was an accident, claiming Grace had willingly engaged in a sex game and he'd unintentionally caused her death. I thought she'd left, he added, as if trying to justify not calling the police right away. But when asked why he bought a suitcase, rented a car, and buried her body, Kempson only bowed his head in silence. Finally, under pressure from investigators, he agreed to lead them to where he'd hidden Grace's body. On the afternoon of December 8th, the search team arrived at a trail off the scenic drive near the Waitakere Reservoir. Just 10 meters from the main road, they found a freshly dug mound. When they opened the buried suitcase, the sight that emerged left everyone frozen. Grace Millane's body curled up, her arms bent. Her clothes were gone, leaving only the bruises and handprints around her neck to tell her final story. The subsequent autopsy confirmed Grace died from strangulation lasting at least 5 to 10 minutes. Far too long to be called an accident. She had lost consciousness within 30 seconds to a minute, but Kempson kept squeezing until life completely left her. Jesse Kempson was no stranger to lies. Born in 1992 in Wellington, New Zealand, he grew up in a broken family. His parents divorced when he was young, and Kempson was raised by his grandparents after years of bouncing between homes. Even as a child, he was known as a compulsive liar, not just a habit, but an uncontrollable instinct. He once bragged to relatives that he'd signed a contract to play professional rugby, then told friends he was battling cancer. These weren't mere childish pranks. They were how Kempson constructed a fabricated world to mask his own failures. Kempson's life was an aimless drift. He couldn't hold down a job for long. His last gig as a telemarketing consultant ended in dismissal just before meeting Grace due to his relentless lying. Despite having no money, Kempson always dressed sharply, projecting an image of success. To Grace, he presented himself as a manager at a major oil company, living in a hotel for work. In reality, he survived on unemployment benefits and welfare. But Grace, with her open heart and youthful innocence, didn't suspect a thing. She believed his smile, trusted the sweet words he spun during their date. When police confronted Kempson with evidence from cameras, phone data, and bloodstains in the room, he had nowhere left to run. Yet even after his arrest, he clung to the sex accident story. "I didn't mean to kill her," he insisted. "It's what she wanted. I just panicked when I saw she was dead." But his actions afterward, photographing her body, watching pornography, going on another date, and meticulously covering his tracks, weren't those of a panicked man. They were the hallmarks of a cold-blooded killer, one who calculated every step to evade justice. On December 8, 2018, Kempson was officially arrested on murder charges. News of Grace's body being found spread rapidly, shaking New Zealand to its core. Thousands of people held vigils for her, and Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern publicly apologized to Grace's family. "I cannot imagine the pain her family's going through. On behalf of New Zealand, I'm sorry. Your daughter should have been safe here, but she wasn't." For Grace's parents, especially David, who was still in Auckland, the apology couldn't ease their loss. They had flown over hoping to find Grace alive, but now they were left with nothing but unspeakable grief. On November 4, 2019, nearly a year after Grace Millane's death, the courtroom at Auckland's High Court was packed. Jesse Kempson, who had once walked into the CityLife Hotel with a deceptive smile, now stood at the dock with an expressionless face. His cold eyes occasionally darted to the stack of papers, or his hands cradled his head, as if searching for one last escape. Facing him was the jury, 7 women and 5 men, tasked with deciding the fate of the man who had taken the life of a young woman full of dreams. The trial was more than a legal battle. It was an echo of pain, outrage, and a desperate cry for justice from Grace's family and the wider community. The prosecution, led by seasoned lawyers, presented a mountain of irrefutable evidence. They played security footage frame by frame, Grace and Kempson hand in hand entering the hotel, then him leaving alone with a heavy suitcase. They displayed the horrific photos from Kempson's phone, Grace's naked body, posed like a perverse plaything. His Google search history was read aloud in court, each word piercing the hearts of Grace's loved ones present. The autopsy results were laid out in detail. Grace had been strangled for 5 to 10 minutes, with such force that deep bruises marked her neck, chest, and arms. She lost consciousness in less than a minute, the forensic pathologist confirmed, but the defendant kept squeezing until she stopped breathing. If that's not murder, what is? The prosecution emphasized that Kempson's actions after Grace's death were not panic, but cold calculation. He bought a suitcase, rented a car, buried her body, then went on a date with someone else as if nothing had happened. This was no accident, they argued. This was an intentional killing, covered up with clumsy lies. They painted Kempson as a predator who exploited Grace's trust to satisfy his desires. then discarded her life like a worthless object. Kempson's defense team, in a final bid to lessen his sentence, resorted to a controversial strategy. They argued that Grace's death resulted from a consensual sex game gone too far. Both were drunk and inexperienced, the defense lawyer said. The defendant had no intent to kill her. When he found her dead, he panicked and tried to hide the body. They leaned on Kempson's claim that Grace had asked him to choke her, calling it an unintended accident. To bolster their case, they pointed out that Grace had no defensive wounds on her hands, a detail they claimed proved she willingly participated in the game. But this strategy quickly met with a wave of outrage. The prosecution fired back. Strangling someone for 5 to 10 minutes, even after they've lost consciousness, is not an accident. It's intentional. They pointed out that Grace had been drinking all evening with a high blood alcohol level, making it harder for her to resist and causing her to lose consciousness faster. The defendant knew that, the prosecutor said sharply. He exploited her vulnerability to strike. Moreover, Kempson's actions afterward, photographing her body, watching pornography, and meticulously covering his tracks, bore no resemblance to someone in panic. They were the hallmarks of a ruthless killer without remorse. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the jury took only 5 hours to reach a verdict. On November 22, 2019, the court clerk read aloud, "Defendant Jesse Kempson, you are found guilty of murder." Kempson showed no reaction. He stood still, his eyes vacant, as if he'd anticipated this outcome. On February 21, 2020, Justice Jeffrey Venning sentenced him. Life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. "You are a large, strong man, and Ms. Millane was small and vulnerable," the judge said. "She endured terror and pain at your hands. This is a fitting sentence for the crime you committed." The sentence for Kempson was a triumph of justice, but for Grace's family, it could not ease their pain. David Millane, who had flown to New Zealand hoping to find his daughter alive, stood outside the courtroom with red-rimmed eyes. "Grace was taken from us in the most brutal way," he said in a statement after the trial. "Our family's life has been turned upside down forever. This pain will follow us to the end." Jillian, Grace's mother, wasn't present in court, but through her husband, she delivered a heart-wrenching message. "As a mother, I would do anything to trade places with her. I live with the torment of not protecting her." Yet Grace's case didn't end as a personal tragedy alone. It sent shockwaves through New Zealand and beyond. Thousands of Auckland residents held vigils, lighting candles to honor the ill-fated British girl. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, her voice breaking, reiterated her apology. "Your daughter should have been safe here, but she wasn't. I'm sorry for that." The case sparked a global debate about women's safety, especially for solo travelers, and raised questions about society's responsibility to shield them from predators like Kempson. After the sentencing, darker corners of Kempson's past began to surface. 2 women he'd previously dated came forward, accusing him of sexual violence and abuse. In a separate trial in October 2020, an ex-girlfriend recounted months of terror. Kempson had held a knife to her throat, choked her, drained $10,000 from her account, and threatened to kill her if she resisted. He was sentenced to an additional 7.5 years for 8 related charges. A month later, in November 2020, Kempson faced charges of raping another British tourist he'd met on Tinder, 8 months before killing Grace. "If you don't do what I say, I'll kill you and your family," he had threatened her. He received another 3.5 years. These sentences ran concurrently with his life term, but they exposed Kempson's true nature. A serial abuser, not just to Grace, but to anyone who crossed his path. Kempson refused to accept his fate. He appealed his murder conviction twice, first in August 2020, then to the Supreme Court in 2021. But both were dismissed. Upon learning he'd lost, he lashed out at the judge. "You're ridiculous. You have no reason to convict me." But his outburst changed nothing. Kempson will spend the rest of his life behind bars at Auckland prison, where he can no longer harm anyone. Meanwhile, Grace's family turned their grief into action. They raised over £11,000 for the White Ribbon Campaign, a New Zealand organization combating gender-based violence. They also launched Love Grace, a campaign encouraging donations of handbags filled with essentials for women fleeing domestic abuse. If it wasn't Grace, it could have been someone else, David once said. Yet personal tragedy continued to haunt the family. In November 2020, David passed away after a battle with cancer, leaving Jillian and their sons Michael and Declan with compounded loss. Grace Millane was more than a victim. She was a symbol of courage, compassion, and a zest for life. From her paintings to the hair she donated for children with cancer, Grace left a legacy that outlived her death. Her story serves as a warning of the dangers lurking in the modern world, but also as proof that justice, though slow, can prevail. Beneath Auckland's city lights, where Grace once stood to take her final photo, her memory burns bright, a flame that will never fade. What do you think of this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and follow the channel to stay updated on future cases. Thank you, and see you next time.